devotion. We're in Revelation chapter 13, and I suspect Revelation 13 is one of the more well-known chapters in Revelation. I would say the section on heaven at the very end, last two chapters, are pretty well established. The four horsemen, chapter 6, the six seals, really well known. And I think this one is a chapter a lot of people come to, mostly because of the last verse, which references the mark of the beast, 666. We'll get to that. But first, let's start from the very beginning. And immediately we are confronted with yet another interpretive challenge. You see that we are introduced, so in chapter 12, we're introduced to the dragon. Here we're introduced to the beast. Now the beast showed up earlier, but only in passing. Here we actually get a description of the beast. So what we did before was say, wait till chapter 13, we can lay a lot of this out. Well, in chapter 13, we see that there is a beast rising out of the sea, and then in verse 11, we see another beast rising out of the earth. So the word earth there, you should probably translate that land. So you have one on the sea, one on land. Now remember, there was a mighty angel in previous chapters where one foot was in the sea, another foot was on the earth or on the land. And so we see similar imagery here with these two beasts. Now, a couple of things we need to note here. You're not going to appreciate what's actually being communicated in chapter 13 without seeing the mockery of Christ here. And so we see talks of the acts of power, fire coming out of the mouth, stuff like that. The receiving worship, the number of crowns, and a lot of numbers in general are all associated in being a contrast, a mockery of the Lamb. So, for example, the beast appears to have been slain, but is risen, or is alive, is similar to the way the Lamb is described as though being slain, yet is still alive himself. And so we see that in order to appreciate what's going on here, this is a mockery of the risen Christ. So let's see this beast. The beast comes out of the sea. All kinds of interpretation of the sea represents Gentiles, represents this or that. I don't know. Just represents the sea. Has 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its head. So actually, let's go on to verse 2. The beast was like a leopard, like a bear. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. Okay, so what do we do with this? So we see the beast is compared to a leopard, a bear, and a lion. And if you know your Bible, you know that if you go back to, I believe it's Daniel 7, it is in the book of Daniel, where Daniel sees 7 creatures. He sees a leopard, he sees a lion, and he sees a bear, and he sees a beast that cannot be described, right? Well, it's striking here. What does John describe? He describes this beast, a generic term, a beast that embodies the other 3 beasts of Daniel. So most agree, most is a relative term when it comes to Revelation. A number of scholars agree that what John is describing here is the 4th beast of Daniel. And so there's 2 things you can do with this. And there's people on both sides. There are those who believe the beast represents an individual. So let's use the word Antichrist here. I'm not a fan of the term Antichrist because that word doesn't show up in the book of Revelation, and it's a generic term that shows up in 1 John. There's the lawless one that shows up in Thessalonians. But what we typically do is we put all these terms together. We prefer the term Antichrist, but do with that whatever you want. So some people see the beast represents an individual, a worldwide secular leader, demonic leader. I use that loosely, that term loosely. But someone like that. So if you come from a dispensationalist background or hold to a dispensational interpretation of Revelation, you're looking for the Antichrist. And this Antichrist is going to come from Rome, and out of Rome, we'll talk about why that is. And they are going to lead a one world order and essentially be the king of the world and all this sort of stuff. They'll make a 7-year treaty with Israel, break it 3.5 years into it, and then go from there. So that's a dispensationalist perspective where you see it represents an individual. And there are non-dispensationalists that hold to something like that. Another view is that the beast represents a nation. And so in Daniel, most believe that the four beasts represent Babylon, the Medo-Persians, Greece, and then Rome. That's probably the most popular view. So what some see here, what John is doing is he's saying, I saw the beast and it's worse than the other three combined, right? He embodies all of them together, like Babylon, like the Medo-Persians, like the Greeks, and now it is Rome. And Rome is the climax of Daniel's vision. So some would see the beast as an individual, but others see it as representing of a nation. And so what you could say is John, remember, he's writing to Roman believers in Asia Minor, most of whom are under persecution. And he is saying, look, Rome is the beast coming out of the sea. And what does Rome do? Rome is given power from his throne and great authority. That's there at the end of verse 2. And what he does is he goes and he makes war against the people of God. It's been a common theme in Revelation for the last few chapters, isn't it? You remember going all the way back to the seals, there are the martyrs under the altar crying out for deliverance. And there is war. Remember that the star, the dragon, is cast down and makes war over the people. You remember the woman is protected for 42 months because the dragon is trying to devour her child, but the child is caught up in the heaven, right? So this has been a theme, this theme of persecution. But notice also what it says in verse 3. One of its heads, remember it has 7 heads, seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. Now, the interpretation there is all over the place. If you believe everything in Revelation is still future, one interpretation, particularly dispensationalism, is that the Antichrist will actually be mortally wounded and perhaps even die and then be raised again. What you see here is a mockery of the resurrection. Now, if you've read Left Behind series, that's exactly what happens. Nikolai Carpathia is killed, and he comes back. Everyone sees it, and that's a sort of a mockery of the two witnesses and all that sort of stuff. But others, particularly of a preterist perspective, or those who think that John's primarily talking about Rome, some will point to the 7 heads are the 7 kings of Rome, starting with Julius Caesar, ending with the guy that comes after Nero, who only served for a few months. And the thinking is that you have, after Augustus, a chaotic time in Rome, which is happening around the time that Jerusalem is being destroyed. And so Nero commits suicide. And there was a rumor going out, perhaps, that he had come back, but really it is the people that come after him. You have Rome that is uncertain and chaotic, but another one takes his place. So it's what you have is Rome looks to be mortally wounded. The city literally was on fire under Nero, yet it is still moving forward. So you do whatever your interpretation is on that. I lean towards the Rome conclusion, but a year ago I probably would have said something else. So a year from now, who knows what I can come up with. But you'll notice verse 5, the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. We've talked a lot about 42 months, 3.5 years. I think it was at 1,600 days, whatever it is. The issue here is blasphemous words. Many point out that Caesar was often called Lord and God. That is blasphemy. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God. Verse 7, also it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. That word conquer, do a word study of it in Revelation. I think it would really help you in your reading of it. Authority was given to it over every tribe, people, language, and nation. That does fit Rome, but it would fit a future Antichrist as well. And all who dwell on the earth will worship it, everyone whose name had not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the Lamb, life of the Lamb who was slain. That book of life will show up at the end of the book on Judgment Day. And then notice that this section ends there at the end of verse 10. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Now remember, the book is written to people being persecuted by the Romans in varying degree. And so it makes sense, at the very least, there is a present interpretation of Revelation. So yes, I do believe it talks about Rome, but I also do believe he's describing things yet to come. So what I see is the beast representing not just Rome, but a pattern of violence that comes from empires. And you can read throughout history, what you see with governments is a pattern of violence and oppression and injustice that come from empires and civil authorities and governments of all stripes. And that's still happening today. Both large, wealthy, mighty nations and smaller third world nations, you still have this pattern. And so no nation is exempt from this. When a nation turns against God, it will turn against God's people. Remember that the dragon couldn't get the child, so went to his followers. And America is not exempt from that. The farther away we get from God, the more angry we become against God's people. Right? So Revelation is just as relevant today as any other point in history. Well, that's the first beast. We meet the second beast starting in verse 11. This one comes out of the earth. We talked about that. It had two horns like a lamb. It spoke like a dragon. Again, more mockery because of a ram. And anyways, but spoke like the dragon. So there is a relationship here. Many see this second beast, the false prophet, as being a servant of the beast. So its job there in verse 12 is to make the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. And to do so, perform great signs, even calling down fire down from heaven. The point was, verse 14, it deceives those who dwell on the earth. It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast. There's a lot of debate as to what that means. So that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead. So we'll come to the mark of the beast here in a second. So my view of this is, what you have is the dragon's tail has, or his forked tongue has, a political side and a religious side. And this is really what makes Christianity so unique in the world, is the separation between those. In that the state has no authority over the church. And the church has a moral obligation to influence the state because it influences the public square, the culture. But they are separate. Right? And this is a gift that was given to America because of a Judeo-Christian worldview, really a Christian worldview. Okay? Well, but throughout all of history, the two were one. And it's increasingly becoming that. Secular worship is affecting secular government. And so much of the stuff that's come down from leftists reflect or are driven by a religious motivation, right? A moral, ethical, religious motivation. Well, with that said, again, if the beast is Rome, what is this false prophet, this other beast? One of the things that's striking to me, and I could be wrong on this, is that the two primary issues among the seven churches is, one, persecution, so that's an outside force, and then false teaching, that is an inside threat. So we had talk of Jezebel, the synagogue of Satan, and the Nicolaitans. Nicolaitans are mentioned twice. I think the synagogue of Satan is mentioned twice in Revelation. So we have precedent to say, look, you go back to the churches of Asia Minor, the seven churches, and what you have are both political threats and religious threats. We come to chapter 13, what do we find? A political threat that wages war against the people of God, and a religious threat which seduces the people to worship the beast. And so I do wonder if just in general we have political threats and religious seduction for the readers meant Nicolaitans, the synagogue of Satan, or whatever, or just a false teaching in general. Some see the false prophet fulfilled with the false religion in Judaism at this time, because of what we see in Acts parallels with some of the stuff we see here. I'm not sure we can be that specific. Certainly Rome had a religious system that you were expected to participate in and worship in. This shows up throughout the New Testament. But I do think at the very least there is something to the political and the religious, that when the two are wedded, violence and oppression and injustice will follow. Some worse than others, but it will follow nonetheless. So the more religious secularism becomes, the more violent it will become. And if you don't believe me, let me tell you about 2020 for a minute, right? We've become more more religiously secular. We've become more violent as a nation, okay? Well, let's look at this last part, the part that people want to look at. That is the false prophet and the beast, causes everyone to be marked on the right hand of their forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So, a couple things to do here. One, notice that this political religious marriage weaponizes the marketplace. Now, this makes sense, doesn't it? Think about it. In the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, as the new sexual revolution dominates our culture, what are we seeing? If you do not wave this flag, if you will not announce this slogan, then your business will be shut down. You will be fired. You will be victimized by our Pharisaical interpretation of truth and justice. Okay? We see that right now happening, going on, right? How many people have to go to the Supreme Court to say, I should have a right to run my business in accordance to my religion, right? Like this is usually what happens throughout history. This is why I see Revelation. Yes, it all fits Rome, the 7 hills, which was so up in chapter 17. I do believe it all fits Rome and the Caesars and the persecutions and the false worship, all that sort of stuff. But I also believe that it establishes a pattern among empires and nations that we still see today. When you have religion and political influence together, you will have a weaponizing of an economy in order to threaten people to give in. So people will say, look, if it is not to my advantage to proclaim Christ, therefore I will go after the beast. And we see that now, right? One of the things I think we've seen in the church is there is no benefit to go into church in terms of economic advantages, career advantages, or anything like that. Used to be, if you want to get elected in a small town, you have to not only attend church, you have to be a participant, an active participant in a local church. It's where all the voters were. We've lost that a lot, right? So I do believe that the weaponization of an economy is a common tactic throughout history. Now, what specifically does John have in mind here? And that's where we get verse 18. This calls for wisdom, discernment, right? And so let one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. So notice here that this number is a calculation. It isn't 666, it's 666. And it involves calculation. So that number should reveal a name, for it is the number of a man, right? That's what he says here. So in theory, we should be able to find someone. And the options are endless. And so what people do is they say, look, the mark of the beast, the Antichrist. What can we do? 666 and the Antichrist. My favorite is, it's Ronald Wilson Reagan. You'll notice that in all three of his names, there are 6 letters. Obviously, it's Ronald Reagan. John Kennedy was another one in America because he's Catholic, the first Catholic president, I believe the only Catholic president we've had since. We've had other Catholics run. No, Biden, I guess, is Catholic, technically. So I guess we've had 2 now. But people thought that because the Catholic Church is from Rome, that it would influence Kennedy. Kennedy would be the false prophet. The Pope would be Antichrist. All that sort of stuff. Well, the options are endless. Henry Kissinger, George W. Bush, Barack Obama. I still remember when President Obama was first elected, the Sunday school lesson was on who is the Antichrist. And one of the guys in there wrote Barack Obama, right? Well, people have been doing stuff like that for centuries. But let's be clear here. The first readers, when they came across this, let's say you've got some guy, he's trying to calculate that number and he gets a name. Can you imagine how surprised he would be if it came out as Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? They wouldn't know who those people are. The implication is that the first readers who calculated this number would get a name or something. And so the most common name is Nero Caesar. So you have to have both in order for it to work. I don't know. By the way, this was common at the time. We have graffiti, if you will, in I think Pompeii. That says "I'm in love with," and it had the number, right? And we have other examples like that. So Nero is probably the best option. Some have seen other Caesars as the answer to this. You could do with that whatever you want. But I think the main point here would be the influence of political influence and religion. What it does is it pollutes true religion. It's a problem that Christianity has to be careful of this. And what you have is, what comes out of that is the victimization of God's people. And this is a pattern throughout history. Well, I think I've gone long enough for today. Hope to see you guys here tomorrow. Lord willing, we'll do devotions tomorrow and Wednesday. We'll probably take Thursday and Friday off. And we'll pick up after Christmas. Hope, Lord willing, to see you guys tomorrow.